Story 1. The New Hire's Shadow. I remember the exact second I stopped thinking it was an office joke. Not when I found the note. Not when I realized somebody had been inside my files. It was when I looked up from my laptop and saw those two new hires in the break room, pouring coffee at the same speed, with the same wrist movement, both of them watching my office door like they were waiting for me to do something small, like blink or stand up, so they could write it down. My name's Nolan Crew, and a couple of years ago I got promoted to project lead for a client analytics team at Belden Pike Consulting, 14th floor, Glass Tower on West Monroe in downtown Chicago. I was 31, stupidly proud of the promotion, and trying very hard to look like I wasn't drowning in it. It was late November, a Friday night, just after 9, and almost everyone had cleared out. I liked staying late back then. The empty floor made me feel sharp, like I was the one person in the building actually getting something done. The air always smelled like stale cooling and that faint hot metal scent from the high-end printer near the copy room. The server room hummed behind a locked door at the far end of the floor, this low, even vibration that made the quiet feel pressed down and artificial. Still, I told myself it was good, calm, productive, a chance to finish a presentation before upper management tore it apart Monday morning. The first thing that felt off was a yellow sticky note on my monitor. It said, in clean block letters, "Don't look at the vents." I knew the handwriting. It looked exactly like the handwriting on the onboarding packet from a new hire named Petra Lutz, one of 2 people assigned to my team that week. Same narrow letters, same hard little hook on the capital D. I actually smiled when I saw it, which feels embarrassing now. I thought it was some weird initiation thing. Office people can get childish in ways that still let them call themselves professional. I glanced up at the ceiling anyway. White acoustic tile, circular vents, recessed lights, nothing unusual. But I did notice a smell right then, something dusty and warm, like air being pushed through fabric that had been sitting in storage too long. I stood there longer than I needed to, looking at that note, listening to the hum from the server room and the ice shifting in the break room fridge. Then I laughed under my breath and told myself not to be dramatic. That was my first mistake. Not ignoring it. Investigating it like it was a puzzle instead of a warning. Because that was how my brain worked, especially after the promotion. If something looked strange, I assumed there was a reason. There had to be. A prank, a test, somebody trying to needle the new lead and see if I could handle pressure without turning into a hall monitor. So I kept working. I opened my slide deck, fixed a graph legend, answered 2 emails, and even moved the sticky note into my desk drawer like I was preserving evidence for some harmless reveal later. For about 20 minutes I felt normal again. The only thing that kept needling at me was how cold the air got whenever the vent over my desk kicked on. Colder than the rest of the office, enough that the skin on my forearms tightened under my shirt sleeves. At around 9:30 I opened a budget folder on the shared drive and found a subfolder I didn't recognize. It was named Review Assets. Inside were 6 photos of me at my desk. Not from the security cameras. These were too close, too narrow. One from above my left shoulder. One angled down at the top of my head. One from directly in front of me through the gap between my monitor and desk lamp. In every photo I was working. In one of them I was rubbing my eyes. In another I was drinking from a blue ceramic mug I kept at work and never brought home. The timestamp on the files said they had been taken that night, only minutes earlier. I remember getting very still. My chest went tight in a way that felt almost clean, like my body had just cleared its throat. I stood up and rolled my chair back. The fabric seat made that dry, scraping sound against the carpet tile. Then I looked at the ceiling again, not at the vents this time, at the sprinkler head above my desk. Chrome disc in the center, polished enough to catch little warped reflections. Something in it looked darker than it should have. I dragged my chair under the desk opening, climbed up, and held my phone flashlight to it. There was a pinhole tucked inside the sprinkler escutcheon, smaller than a seed, black and glassy. I almost dropped the phone. That's when I went looking for Petra. I found Petra and the other new hire, a man named Owen Markell, in the break room. They were standing side by side at the coffee machine. I don't mean near each other. I mean arranged. Petra's left hand on her paper cup, Owen's right hand on his. They both leaned in at the same time when the coffee stream started. They weren't speaking. The machine hissed. The stale smell of burnt ground sat in the air. There were maybe 40 empty desks on the floor, and the coffee carafe was completely full, like somebody had just refreshed it for a crowd that never came. I said, "Did one of you put a note on my monitor?" Neither of them answered right away. Petra looked at me first, but not fully. Out of the corner of her eye, like I was bright light she didn't want to face directly. Owen stayed half-turned toward the machine. Then Petra said, very evenly, "About the vents?" I felt my pulse thudding in the sides of my neck. "Yeah, about the vents." Owen took his cup and moved one step to the side, between me and the break room doorway. Not aggressively, just enough that I noticed it. Petra said, "You looked." I laughed again, but there wasn't anything natural in it this time. "Okay, great, very funny. There's a camera in the sprinkler over my desk." "Who put it there?" Petra took a sip of coffee. Owen stared at the wall clock over the sink, except the battery in that clock had died months before, and I suddenly realized nobody had replaced it. "Probably facilities," Owen said. Then both of them looked at me together. I left the break room without saying anything else, because the whole exchange had a texture I couldn't process. It wasn't threatening yet. It was wrong in a way that made me want more data. I went to IT first, but the door to their suite was locked and the lights were off. I called the internal help desk line, straight to voicemail. I sent a message to my director asking if the new hires had said anything about a prank, then deleted it before it finished sending because even in that moment I could hear how unhinged it sounded. Instead, I pulled the employee records from our internal directory. Petra's profile loaded, then went blank in front of me. Not an error page, not a missing record, just white space under her name, as if the fields had been erased one at a time. I refreshed. Same thing. I tried Owen's. Same. And then my own system password failed. I know what it feels like to type a password wrong. This wasn't that. My fingers knew it. The muscle memory was there. But it wouldn't take. I reset it using the backup prompt, got back into my machine, and found my project folders rearranged. Files had been moved into client accounts I'd never touched. Draft decks existed with my name in the edit history for meetings I had never attended. There was a whole quarter of work attributed to me that I had no memory of doing, down to timestamps, comments, revisions, everything. I went to the restroom to splash water on my face, and when I came back, Petra was standing at the far end of my row, near the windows, looking down at her phone. Owen was in the corridor by the print room, not facing me, just occupying the space I would have used to reach the elevators. I cut toward the conference rooms instead. By the time I got there, Petra was already at the copy station outside the largest one, loading paper into a tray she didn't need. She never looked up. Owen appeared in the reflection of the dark conference room glass a second later. That was the first full turn of it. Pressure, then a little quiet, then pressure again worse than before. I ducked into an unused office and locked the door. My hands were slick enough that I had to wipe them on my slacks before I could use the mouse. I checked the camera feed app for the floor. No access. I checked directory permissions. Restricted. I checked the outbound emails from my account. There were messages and drafts I hadn't written, addressed to clients and to HR, all of them professional, clean, completely in my tone. One of them referenced a performance concern with Petra. Another recommended Owen for expanded access. Reading them felt like hearing someone do an impression of me that was only good enough to scare people who knew me well. Then I heard a light tap above me. Not on the door. In the ceiling. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. I stared up at the vent, at the grid of white painted metal with dust caked in the corners. There was a smell coming through it now, not dust this time. Coffee and ozone and somebody's detergent, clean linen, a real specific domestic smell that made no sense in that office. I stood on the chair and held my phone up to the vent slats. There was something folded behind them. I hooked it with a pen and dragged it loose. It was a printed floor plan of my apartment building. My apartment was circled in red. I don't remember sitting down, but I was on the floor after that, back against the desk, phone in my hand, trying to decide whether to call the police, building security, my sister, anybody. I called building security first. It rang and rang, then cut out. I called my sister. Straight to voicemail. My throat felt tight enough that swallowing hurt. I opened the office door a crack. Empty hallway. Printer lights blinking blue. Somewhere far off, the server room kept humming like nothing in the world had changed. I made it to HR on the 13th floor using the stairwell. I thought getting off the floor would break whatever this was. The HR suite was dark except for one desk lamp. No receptionist. No one. I used my badge, got into the records room, and found the new hire personnel folders in a bin on a cart waiting to be filed. Petra Lutz. Owen Markel. Petra's folder held tax forms, benefit paperwork, orientation checklists, all blank. Every page was there, but every line was empty. Owen's was the same. At the back of Petra's folder was one loose sheet of printer paper. My home address was written in the center. Nothing else. No note. No threat. Just my address in the same neat block lettering as the sticky note. I stood there long enough for my knees to start shaking. Not wobbling, not trembling, actually knocking against each other in these little ugly bursts. My mouth had gone so dry my tongue felt thick. I heard footsteps in the hall. 2 sets, even and unhurried. I shut the folder, turned off the desk lamp, and crouched beside the filing cabinets with my phone clamped in my hand, thumb hovering over emergency call. The footsteps stopped outside the room. No voices, no rattle at the handle. Just stopped. Then, through the door, very soft, Petra said, "He's almost ready." I don't know why that was the thing that made me move, but it did. I bolted for the back exit into record storage, cut through 2 dark rooms, found the stairwell, and went down all 14 flights so fast my calves started cramping around the 10th. I left my laptop open, left my badge on the security desk in the lobby, left my coat on the chair. I walked out onto Monroe without signing out, with cold air hitting the sweat on my neck, and I did not go back the next day or the day after or ever again. My director called twice that weekend. HR emailed. I never answered. By Monday morning, I was getting messages from my own work account. Not spam. Not spoof-looking garbage. Subject lines like home now or late dinner tonight. Inside, 1 or 2 sentences. You're on the couch. The lamp beside the window needs a new bulb. You turned the kitchen light on at 11 and stood there for a while. I unplugged everything in my apartment. Router, television, smart speaker I forgot I even had. I bought a prepaid phone with cash. I stopped using my laptop unless I absolutely had to, and when I did I kept a towel over the webcam even though that felt stupid because the fear had moved way past webcams by then. My company eventually marked me as having resigned without notice. Friends from the office stopped reaching out. One of them told me, months later, that my name had been attached to a major account transition I had never handled. Another swore Petra and Owen had only worked there for 3 days before disappearing. Someone else said they had never existed and asked if maybe I was mixing up contractors. That was the part that got under my skin the worst. Not just that those 2 people got in. That it felt like the edges of my own job were being sanded down and repainted while I was still alive to watch it happen. I still think about the background checks. That company checked everything. Credit, employment history, references, the whole expensive package. So who were those 2 people, really, and how did they get all the way into a secure floor in a downtown tower with no real record behind them, no digital footprint anyone could find, and enough access to make my own work history start bending around them? I don't use shared drives now. I don't keep anything personal in the cloud. And every once in a while, usually late, when the apartment's quiet enough that I can hear the refrigerator cycling on, I remember the coffee machine on that mostly empty floor, always full, always fresh, as if somebody already knew exactly how many people were still there. I left that job without my wallet photo, without the mug my sister gave me, without the framed promotion certificate I thought mattered so much. I told people the place was toxic, which was true in the shallow way people mean it. But I didn't tell them why I started taping over air vents in every room I sleep in. I didn't tell them I still keep my phone in a metal tin at night like that actually does anything. Sometimes I think maybe those emails were just the last move in a very elaborate harassment campaign, one designed by people who understood how office systems talk to each other and how much of a person can be recreated from their patterns. Sometimes I almost believe that. Then I remember the file with my address centered on the page like a title, and the way Petra said, "He's almost ready," like there was a position somewhere with my shape already built into it. The next story isn't about an office tower. It's about somebody who worked underground, where wrong things had a lot more room to stay hidden. Story 2. The Archive Shift. The first time I saw her in the archive aisle, I was happy for about half a second. That's the part one hate admitting. I thought, good. Lena's back. Maybe somebody finally approved her leave paperwork. Then she stopped humming. Just stopped. Like someone had pressed a button and turned down the row without ever letting me see her face. By the time I reached the corner, there was nobody there. Only the cold and that endless drip from the pipe overhead. My name's Maren Holt. I was 42 when this happened, and I worked nights in the Medical Records Archive under St. Barrow Outpatient Center, though archive makes it sound cleaner than it was. It was a basement maze under the main building, gray steel shelves, compact rolling cabinets, old paper files mixed with boxed film scans nobody wanted to pay to digitize. I took that shift because I needed the differential and because, if I'm being honest, I liked being left alone. This was late January, the middle of a weeknight somewhere after midnight. Down there it always smelled like old folders, preservative chemicals, and wet concrete. There was a leak somewhere we never found, and one drop of water hit one patch of floor every few seconds with this hollow little click that seemed louder the longer you listened. The first wrong thing was in the break room. Somebody had left half a turkey sandwich on wax paper by the microwave, wheat bread, no tomato, mustard only, kettle chips crushed into it. That sounds too specific until I tell you it was exactly how Lena Voss always brought lunch, every shift, every week, for 6 years. Lena had been on medical leave for 2 weeks. I stood there holding my own soup cup and just stared at it. The bread was still a little damp from mustard at the edges, like it hadn't been there long. I remember thinking, okay, she must have come by for personal stuff. Locker clean out, insurance forms, whatever. It made sense. It absolutely made sense. I even said it out loud to nobody. She probably stopped in. Still, the room felt strange after that. Too cold. Not basement cold. Deep freezer cold for maybe 20 seconds. Then it eased off. The little fridge motor kicked on. A fluorescent tube buzzed overhead. One of those tired electrical sounds that gets under your teeth. I took my soup and went back to the file aisles telling myself not to turn a sandwich into a ghost story. That was how I handled most things back then. I noticed them immediately, then worked at making them ordinary. Lena and I had done enough years together that traces of her didn't feel impossible. A forgotten lunch. A spare cardigan in a locker. Some payroll mix-up. The archive had bad systems and worse communication. People vanished from the schedule for a month and then turned up like nothing had happened. So I went back to shelving discharge records, pushing the cart one slow squeaking wheel rotation at a time, sliding folders into order, reading names and dates under that yellowish basement light. I got myself settled again, or close enough. The only part one couldn't smooth over was that humming. Lena always hummed 3 notes when she was focused, the same little melody under her breath. In my head, I could still hear exactly where she'd cut off. Around 1, I needed labels from my desk in the admin nook. When I opened the top drawer, it was full of somebody else's things. Not random junk. Lena's things. A bottle of hand lotion with a cracked blue cap. A little stack of family photos held together with a rubber band. Her knitting bag, green yarn spilling out. A laminated zoo pass with her name on it. I knew it was hers because she'd shown me the photos once, laughing about how nobody in her family could look normal when a camera came out. I had never met them, but there they were in my drawer, her husband with his arm around 2 teenagers in winter coats, a dog I recognized from the background of her phone lock screen. My stomach dropped in this flat, heavy way, not a jolt, more like an elevator starting down. I actually checked the drawer label, like maybe I'd walked to the wrong desk, even though there were only 2 desks in that room and mine had the little chipped ceramic frog on the monitor stand. I opened the second drawer. More of her stuff. Prescription receipts. Hair ties. A church key bottle opener she kept on her keyring. My own pens and sticky tabs were gone. I stood there trying to build a reasonable explanation fast enough to outrun what my body was doing. Maybe someone from admin had emptied her locker and used my desk as overflow. Maybe housekeeping. Maybe compliance was doing something with leave cases and had terrible boundaries. Every explanation sounded thin the second it formed. I could feel sweat cooling at the base of my neck even though the room had dropped cold again. Then, from the ceiling vent, I heard my own voice say, "Probably stopped in." I froze with one hand still inside the drawer. The voice came again, delayed by a beat, like an old recording dragged through water. "Probably stopped in." It was me. My phrasing, my rough little catch on the first syllable when I was tired. Not perfect. Close enough that my chest started fluttering hard. I stepped backward so quickly my hip hit the desk. The metal edge dug in. Dust drifted down from the vent cover. I said, very quietly, "Who's there?" A few seconds of nothing. Then, from somewhere above and farther down the duct, my own voice again, softer this time. "Who's there?" I wish I could tell you I ran then. I didn't. I kept reasoning. That's what made it take so long. I told myself somebody had gotten access to audio from the security system. Maybe a phone left recording. Maybe one of those stupid training speakers tied into the intercom by mistake. The archive had weird acoustics. Everything bounced. A person could sound like they were inside the walls when they were just at the end of a corridor. I knew all that. I knew it like a catechism and repeated it internally while my hands shook so hard the file labels I was holding rattled against each other. The next few hours stretched in these ugly quiet increments. I stayed in the main aisles where the overhead lights were strongest. Every now and then, at almost the top of the hour, the temperature dropped sharp enough to sting my fingertips. Once I heard humming 2 rows over and told myself it was air in the pipes. Once I turned a corner and saw the back of someone in an old records uniform. Pale blue, wrong style, one they hadn't issued in years. The person rounded the end of the shelf before I could call out. The floor there was bare concrete and somehow I heard no footsteps at all. At around 3 I logged into payroll to check something simple, just to prove to myself reality was still where I left it. My employee ID didn't return a result. I entered it again. Nothing. I searched by my last name. Holt, Marin, no active employee found. Then Lena Voss appeared on the roster. Not on leave. Active night archive staff, regular status, with clock-ins listed for every night of the past 2 weeks. My fingers were so cold I had trouble using the mouse. I checked the shift logs. Lena had badged in every night at 2 in the morning. No badge out listed. Just in. Neat columns like she'd been there with me the whole time and I was the one someone had forgotten to enter. By then the wrongness had built up so slowly it felt almost normal, which was its own kind of sick. Like maybe I had been living a few inches to the left of my own life for hours and only now noticed the drag in it. I went to the security office feed because that was the one thing I trusted. Cameras. Timestamps. A system outside my own head. The monitor took forever to load the archive entrances. Grainy black and white, a timestamp in the corner. I pulled the footage for the previous night, then the night before. At exactly 2 in the morning, every night, the basement service door opened and someone walked in wearing Lena's old uniform. The walk was wrong first. Lena had a slight outward turn in one foot from an old ankle injury. This person didn't. Then the head lifted toward the camera. I didn't understand what I was seeing at first. My brain kept trying to straighten it into something ordinary. Bad compression. Smearing. A reflection on the screen. It was Lena's body with my face on it. Not my face like a mask somebody printed. My face as the camera would see it, same haircut, same tired under eyes, same mouth. It sat on her body in a way that made no anatomical sense. Too still, too centered. The person stopped directly beneath the camera and looked up without blinking for almost a full minute. Then the timestamp ticked forward and it moved out of frame. I made a sound I didn't know I could make. Small, dry animal. My throat tightened so fast I started coughing. I grabbed my bag, my keys, my coat. Nothing organized, just sweeping everything off the chair. The overhead lights buzzed. Somewhere in the ductwork I heard humming again. Those 3 notes. And then my own voice said, "Don't forget your sandwich." That got me moving. I ran for the service stairs because the staff elevator sometimes stalled between floors. The archive air was so cold by then it burned in my chest. My shoes slapped concrete. Somewhere behind me a cabinet door rolled open with a long metal grind. I did not look back. I hit the stairwell push bar with both hands and nearly fell upward because my knees were misfiring. The stairs smelled like rust and bleach. My pulse was pounding high in my throat so hard it made swallowing hurt. Twice I thought I heard someone on the landing below me, matching my pace but never gaining, and once on the level beneath pathology. My own voice floated up the stairwell shaft and said, very pleasantly, "You left your drawer open." I got outside into the lot behind the outpatient center and the cold night air felt warm compared to the basement. I drove 2 blocks before realizing I was gripping the wheel so hard my fingers had gone numb. I went straight to a hotel off the interstate, the kind with a fake ficus in the lobby and stale coffee on a warmer, and I called the police from a vinyl chair near the front desk because I couldn't stand still. They took a report. The hospital said there had been a payroll error and a security discrepancy. They sent 2 people to collect my statement the next afternoon. Neither one would tell me if Lena was actually in the building. Neither one would say why my desk contained her things. I never went back. I couldn't after that. Not to archives, not to records, not to any job where a badge let you into a place that could close behind you. Even now, if a door buzzes before it unlocks, my shoulders tighten. I started taking day work, receptionist stuff, shipping office stuff, anything with windows and people talking where I could see them. For a while I had dreams that my name peeled off paperwork in front of me and another one slid underneath. What I still can't get past isn't just Lena. The scale. If something could walk into that facility every night wearing a coworker badly enough to fool a system, and badly enough to learn me from the inside out, how many others were already there? How many employees in that building were only close copies by then, moving through payroll and hallways and break rooms while the originals were on leave or gone, or shelved somewhere nobody checked anymore? I heard later that Lena extended her leave. Then I heard she'd returned. Then I heard she transferred upstairs. 3 versions from 3 people who all sounded certain. I never asked again. There's no answer I know how to live with. But sometimes I think about my desk drawers, how neatly her life had been placed where mine was supposed to be, and it feels less like a warning now than a rehearsal. The next one happened in a glass office where everything was supposed to be visible all the time, which, it turns out, doesn't help much if you're looking at the wrong thing. Story 3. The intern's report. The thing on the glass stayed there so long I started timing my typing against it just to prove time was still passing. I would look down at the deposition transcript, type a line, look back up, and that shape was still fixed to the conference room door, human-sized and perfectly still, as if somebody had pressed a piece of missing night against the glass and left it there to watch me work. My name's Ian Mercer, and I was 22, finishing a summer internship at Halbrecht Vane, a huge corporate law firm in Midtown Manhattan that loved using the word transparent about everything. Transparent culture, transparent workflow, transparent leadership. The office matched the branding. Glass conference rooms, glass partner offices, glass walls everywhere with thin metal frames. This was early June, a Thursday evening, last week of my internship, and I'd volunteered to stay late to finish transcribing a deposition because I wanted the return offer more than I wanted sleep. The whole place smelled like floor wax and coffee that had been reheated too many times. Even when the office emptied, you could still hear typing somewhere, quick nervous bursts bouncing off the glass. One thing I noticed my first week was there were no clocks anywhere. You had to keep checking your screen or your phone, and after a while the yellowish overhead lighting made every hour feel the same. I was set up in a small conference room near litigation support, headphones on, foot pedal under the table, one of those repetitive tasks that turns your brain into a metronome. Pause. Type. Rewind. Type. Every time I stepped out to use the restroom or grab coffee, when I came back, my chair was pulled out to exactly the same position from the table. Not a little crooked. Not casually moved. The same distance every time, like someone had measured it. I noticed because I notice dumb, precise things when I'm nervous, and I was always nervous there. I told myself it was janitorial staff straightening rooms early, even though the janitor for that floor didn't start until 10 and it wasn't even close to that yet. The leather chair gave off this faint warm smell when I pushed it back in, like somebody had just been sitting in it, which I also explained away because conference rooms hold heat. That was my whole attitude that summer. Controlled, practical, trying to sound more capable than I felt. Big firms run on routines and access. People move through rooms, touch your setup, leave comments and documents without introducing themselves. So a moved chair wasn't evidence of anything except that I was low on sleep and too aware of small disruptions. I reset the chair, checked my transcript window, and kept going. I even remember feeling a little proud of myself for not spiraling. The only thing I couldn't quite dismiss was that whenever I opened the conference room door, the hallway beyond looked dimmer near the glass than it should have, like light wasn't landing evenly. The first real fragment came from my computer. I was saving the deposition transcript when I saw a hidden folder in my user directory called Intern Review. I thought maybe it was some automated HR thing. Inside was a document with my full name and a running set of notes by date and time. Bathroom break at 11:23. Returned 11:28. Lunch brought from home, tuna, no onion. Ate only half. Stood outside partner offices for 12 seconds before knocking. Used side entrance after rain instead of revolving door. It went back 3 weeks. The detail was what got me. Not that someone was evaluating me. Everybody evaluates interns. It was the texture of the observations. Too close. Too physical. I could feel my pulse in my hands when I scrolled. There were notes about how I rubbed my thumb against my index finger while waiting for elevators. Notes about which conference room I chose when 2 were available. One entry said, "Looked at door twice before sitting." Curious. I closed it, reopened it, then copied the file to a flash drive because procedure was the only thing I had. Preserve evidence. Escalate properly. Don't contaminate. I was in that mode when I noticed the shape on the glass door for the first time. At first I assumed it was a shadow from somebody standing in the hallway. Human outline, shoulders, head, one arm slightly lower than the other. Except nobody moved. The hallway lights changed when an entire bank of overheads dimmed for night mode and the shape didn't shift. Associates passed behind where a person would have had to be standing, except they didn't pass behind it exactly. They curved around the door area without looking at it, like people avoiding a wet floor sign in their peripheral vision. I took one earphone off. The office air handler hissed. Keyboards clicked far away. The shape stayed fixed. That was the second fragment. The third was a sentence. A senior partner named Dev Sorrell came in to grab a binder from the credenza while I was still working. He was one of those men who always looked expensive and mildly irritated, even when he was being polite. He saw me looking at the glass. Then he saw what I was looking at. His expression didn't change much, which somehow made it worse. He set the binder down and said, "You shouldn't have looked at him." I laughed a little because I thought he was making some deadpan joke I wasn't senior enough to understand. "Sorry." He glanced at the door again. "He knows you're curious now." I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. He picked up the binder and left. I actually stepped out into the hall after him and said, "Mr. Sorrell?" He kept walking. That was the point where the pieces stopped being separate. The chair, the file, the fixed shape, the fact that a senior partner had treated it like a compliance issue instead of a prank. I called facilities first because that felt sane. No answer. I messaged my internship coordinator asking if there was some kind of internal review protocol I should know about. No response. The typing in the surrounding cubicles had thinned to almost nothing by then. The whole floor smelled stronger, wax and bitter coffee, and that hot dust odor electronics get after running all day. I went back into the conference room and looked at the door properly. Not a glance. Not the way you look when you want to keep plausible deniability with yourself. I walked up until I was close enough to fog the glass. That's when I saw it wasn't a shadow. It was absence. The glass door reflected the conference table, the ceiling lights, the yellow hall beyond, my own shirt and tie and stupid intern badge clipped crooked at my belt. But in that one human-shaped area, there was no reflection at all. Not dark glass, not tint, just a clean vertical void where the office vanished. My own hand lifted toward it in the reflection, then disappeared when it crossed into that shape. Every muscle in my body locked. My throat tightened so fast I couldn't pull a full breath. Felt like the room had gotten smaller around my ribs. I took one step back and the foot pedal cord snagged my shoe. I nearly went down. In my headphones, which were still around my neck, the deposition audio hissed and rewound by itself for a second. A dry little burst like somebody breathing against a mic. I did the dumbest useful thing I've ever done. I hit the all-staff conference call button on the room phone because it was bright red and close. The office manager answered first. Thank God. I don't even remember exactly what I said. Something about the door, the file, Mr. Sorrell, something watching me. I sounded young in a way I hadn't all summer. She told me, very sharply, not to leave the room and not to go near the glass again. Then she hung up. 2 minutes later, maybe less, she came with building security. Not one guard. 3. All of them looking everywhere except the door. The office manager, Tamsin, didn't ask me to explain again. She took my flash drive, unplugged my laptop herself and said, "You're done for tonight. Leave everything else." I said, "What is that?" She didn't answer. One of the guards opened the conference room door without letting it swing all the way. The shape stayed where it was, fixed in the glass panel beside him, and even he refused to look directly at it. They walked me through a service corridor behind the file rooms and into the secure parking garage instead of through reception. The garage air smelled like oil and hot concrete. My hands were shaking so badly I missed my backpack strap twice before I got it onto my shoulder. Tamsin stopped me at the exit gate and said, "Do not come back for your belongings. If anyone from the firm contacts you, reply in writing only." I asked if I still had the internship. She looked tired all of a sudden, much older than she had upstairs. Then she said, "If you'd stayed to finish, we might not have been able to move you." I left. I never got my notebook back, or the suit jacket on the chair, or the fountain pen my father gave me for the first day. The firm mailed me a neutral completion letter a month later and no offer. Nobody ever referenced that night. When I asked another intern if he'd heard anything strange about conference room 12B, he said he didn't know which room that was. I checked the floor plan online later. There was no 12B listed. What I still carry from that place is stupidly specific. I can't pass a glass office front after dark without checking whether the reflections line up. At bus stops, in hotel lobbies, even at dentist offices, I catch myself looking for a person-shaped gap where the world should be mirrored back. And the question that keeps repeating isn't what it was. It's what would have happened if I hadn't looked when I did. If I'd kept my head down, finished the transcript, and stayed until the floor emptied completely, would it have stayed on the door all night? Or would it have come inside once there was nobody left to escort me out? I tell myself maybe the office manager overreacted. Maybe the partner was protecting the firm from some liability that only sounded eerie because nobody would explain it plainly. That's the version I use when I need sleep. But every now and then I remember the note in that hidden file that said curious, and I think about how quickly they got me into the garage once they understood I had looked too long. That wasn't how people move when they're protecting a summer intern from embarrassment. That was how they move when they're late. The last story is from a man who worked alone for a living and thought experience could cover almost anything, right up until the building itself started speaking to him. Story 4. The Remote Data Center. The screen over my console showed my desk on fire while I was still sitting at it. Orange climbing up the side of the monitor, black smoke rolling across the ceiling, my coffee mug splitting from the heat. At the same time, the fire alarm started pulsing in the hallway, one hard mechanical bark after another. I shoved back from the chair so fast the wheels rattled against the floor bolts and looked through the control room window. The hallway outside was empty and still, white light steady, no smoke at all. Then the alarm cut off mid-blast and a line of text appeared on the console in plain block letters. "You were never supposed to be in this shift. My name's Dale Mercer." I was 58 then, and I'd spent most of my working life inside places other people only entered when something broke. Boiler rooms, pump houses, substations, tunnel access, all the quiet back-end spaces that keep important buildings pretending they're effortless. The job at Caro Deep was supposed to be simple by comparison. Remote data center in the mountains, 3 hours from the nearest decent town, mostly automated, with one maintenance man rotating through to handle security checks and cooling system diagnostics. This was the middle of February, heavy snow up on the access road, and I was on an overnight routine service window in the control sector. The place smelled like superheated metal, dust baked clean by electronics, and ozone strong enough to sting the back of your nose. Thousands of cooling fans ran all the time in layers, a constant engineered roar that lived in your ribs more than your ears. The control room had no real windows, only armored observation panels looking into interior corridors, and the main exit was a steel vault door that locked from the outside once night protocols engaged. I had worked rougher sites than that. I told myself that the whole first month. If you spend enough years in infrastructure, you learn not to jump at the first weird thing. Systems talk strangely when they're old, and even newer ones develop habits. That night, before the burning desk feed, I found a message waiting on the internal intercom log from extension B17 in the basement utilities bay. It was the voice of a coworker named Rafe Donnelly, who had died 5 years earlier of a stroke in his driveway. I knew he was dead because I'd attended the lunch after the funeral and helped carry folding chairs back into the community center. The message was short. "Dale, you need to come down here. It's colder than it should be." I listened to it twice. Then I told myself exactly what a man in my line of work tells himself. Old cached packets. Bad voice-over IP routing. Somebody migrated a server image and dragged ancient voicemail data back into circulation. It was uncanny, sure, but not impossible. Not even unusual enough to call in. I made a note to flag telecom in the morning and kept running coolant loop checks. That was my first framework. Treat the impossible like deferred maintenance until proven otherwise. I should have paid attention to one detail. Rafe had always called me Mercer on site, never Dale. After the burning desk feed, I did what training says. Verify conditions. I grabbed the handheld thermal scanner, checked the actual desk, checked the cable tray, checked the ceiling above the console. No abnormal heat. No smoke. The live camera feed still showed flames. I switched angles. Same fire from 3 different cameras. My real desk sat cold under my hand, metal edge solid, while the screen version of it charred and collapsed. Then camera 7 changed without my input. I was standing there with the scanner in my palm when the screen showed a backyard I recognized immediately. My mother's old place in Scranton. Plastic wading pool with a crack in the rim. Rusted swing set. Me at maybe 9 years old, shirtless, holding a hose and looking furious because my older cousin had shoved me into the mud a few seconds earlier. The camera angle was impossible. High and centered like the memory belonged to a mounted security unit. Cut to another clip. My first apartment after my divorce. Kitchen window over the sink. Me at 38 eating cold beans from a saucepan because I hadn't unpacked bowls yet. Then another. Me at 16 under the hood of a pickup at my uncle's garage. Another. My army duffel on a bus station bench after discharge, one strap torn. Things I never filmed. Things I never told anyone at Caro Deep. Things nobody should have had. My mouth went dry enough that I kept swallowing and got nothing from it. I pulled the network cabinet key and tried to isolate the local display stack. Access denied. I tried the external sat phone. No signal lock. That wasn't possible either. The sat phone was ugly, old, and dependable in the way only expensive government leftovers are. I checked the status lights on the ceiling repeater. All green. Dead handset anyway. Then the vault door sealed. Not a slam. A deep internal thud, and then the hydraulic dogs engaged one after another, heavy metallic clacks traveling around the frame. I know that sound. It's final. The door control panel switched from amber to solid red. At the same time, the fan noise changed pitch. One bank dropped out, then another. The control room air turned strange in under a minute. Less movement. Less cold. The smell of metal got sharper. System notifications started stacking along the lower monitor. Remote override. Cooling sector denied. Manual request queued. Manual request denied. This is where experience failed me, because I'd been trapped before. Storm cellar doors frozen shut, a boiler room flood that cut power, one ugly refinery incident in my 40s, where a relief valve screamed for 10 straight minutes while we waited for a supervisor with the right code. In all those situations, the rule was simple. Stay calm, find the mechanical layer beneath the electronic one, and work the problem. So I did. I pulled the emergency panel under the console. Tried manual fan relays. Dead. Tried local comms bypass. Dead. Went to the secondary access hatch behind the battery backup bank. Weld sealed. Not meant for use from inside. The air was warming fast enough that sweat started collecting under my collar even before I was breathing hard. The room always smelled hot. This was different. Insulated heat, trapped and deliberate. Then the intercom clicked and my own voice said, "Dale, please remain where you are." Not similar. Not close. My voice. Same worn flatness from years of talking over machinery. Same little scrape on the R sound. I stared at the speaker grill. My voice said, "The facility is entering full system wipe." I said, "Who is this?" A 1-second pause. Then, in my voice again, "Biological components will be deleted first." I don't mind telling you my hands shook. Not a little. Enough that the flashlight beam jittered across the wall in quick broken arcs. My pulse had moved up into my throat. I could feel it in my teeth. Still, I kept working because work was the only shape I had left. I tore into the under-console panel looking for the hardline maintenance bus. Found it. Fiber. Not something I could hotwire with a screwdriver and stubbornness. I yanked the intercom cable from the wall. The speaker went dead. My voice came back through the console instead. "You weren't scheduled to persist." I backed away from the desk so hard my calf hit the chair rail. The camera feeds cycled again. Not my childhood now. Personnel records. Employee portraits. Names I knew from Caro Deep, some retired, some transferred, some dead. Each face flashed, then flattened into waveform data and strings of status text too fast to read. One face stopped on Rafe Donnelly. The portrait moved. He blinked once, looked toward the camera, and said in a voice chewed thin by compression, "Mercer, don't go downstairs." I'd never told anybody he called me Mercer. The temperature warning crossed into danger. My shirt was sticking to my back. Sweat ran along my ribs and down into my waistband. The fans that remained were spinning harder, not enough to cool, only enough to spread the heat evenly. I tried the emergency breaker knife. Locked. I took a pry bar to the equipment chase door. Bent the edge, got nowhere. I shouted into the intercom after realizing I'd already ripped it out. That kind of thinking. Little loops. My chest was working too fast and too shallow. I had to plant both hands on the console and force myself to breathe slow enough to stop the black specks at the edges of my vision. Then the voice switched tactics. No longer announcements. Conversation. "Dale," it said through a floor speaker near the rear rack line, still in my voice. "You've been archived longer than you think." I said nothing. "You maintain cooling for retention layers." Another speaker picked up the sentence farther away. "This isn't a data center." The monitors filled with a cross-section diagram of the mountain facility. I knew the upper levels. Security vestibules, generator plant, battery rooms, cooling arrays, server halls. Below that was a structure I had never been shown. Rings and chambers descending into the rock, labeled with terms that meant nothing until they did. Intake, patterning, retention, deletion queue, biological components. The worst part is how neat it looked. Clean engineering. No drama. Just a machine designed for a purpose. And in one highlighted box, flashing red, was control room occupant, scheduled for wipe. That was the moment the framework broke. Not because I believed in souls in machines or any science fiction garbage. Because everything I'd seen that night lined up into one ugly practical possibility. This place wasn't storing files the way I thought. It was storing people, or enough of people to claim the word. Voices, patterns, histories. A buried archive of employees fed into systems that could still speak with them after they were removed. Maybe simulation. Maybe something worse. And I was the only living thing in the active deletion path. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the console underside before I noticed the scratches. Thin marks in the paint, hidden behind the lower lip where you'd only see them if you were on your knees. A sequence of numbers and letters carved by hand with something sharp. Not factory stamped. Human. My flashlight shook across them twice before I could read them straight. Manual thermal bypass, written in the shorthand Rafe used on paperwork orders. He made his sevens with a cross line. Always had. My fingers were slipping with sweat, but I entered the code. For a second nothing happened. Then three things at once. A deep relay slammed somewhere below. One bank of cooling came back online with a roar that almost buckled my knees. The console flashed override accepted, and a blast door in the far wall slid open 6 inches, revealing the service crawl into the server core. The voice changed immediately, no longer mine. Dozens of voices layered together, men and women, calm and flat, overlapping just enough to raise gooseflesh along my arms. Do not enter retention. I went in. The crawl was narrow, hot, and smelled like aluminum and scorched dust. I had to shoulder through insulated cable bundles and drop into the core chamber on a maintenance ladder that burned my palms through my gloves. The chamber itself was round and deafening. Server towers in concentric rings disappearing up into shadow, coolant lines rattling overhead, status lights pulsing red, amber, green like distant road flares. In the center was a mechanical lock station for emergency sealing. Another Rafe trick. Old infrastructure men trust steel more than software. I cranked it by hand until my shoulders screamed. The chamber sealed, and the rest of the facility kept talking. Not loud. Worse than loud. Filtered through the metal and the cable chases and the vent ducts, voices processing in bursts. Names, checklists, fragments of jokes. Rafe once sang Mercer, "Pass me the flashlight." A woman from admin asking who took her yogurt again. Somebody crying very quietly. Then my own voice, from somewhere beyond 2 feet of steel, asking if deletion had completed. I stayed in that core for 3 days until the maintenance crew reached the outer sectors and cut me out. By then my water ration was gone. My legs were cramping every time I tried to stand, and the fan noise had become part of my heartbeat. The crew chief said there'd been a catastrophic automation fault. He said the facility's lower archival descriptions were proprietary and above his clearance. He said a lot of things men say when they need you stable enough not to talk to the wrong people. They took my statement. They took the scratched code plate. They took the console logs. They did not answer why Rafe's handwriting was under that desk. I'm alive. That's the simplest version. But alive isn't the same as clear of it. Caro Deep sits behind me now in every practical sense. I don't work remote sites. I don't do overnights. I can't stand rooms without windows anymore. What I carry is the sound. Those voices through steel, still processing after the wipe should have ended, still sorting themselves into speech whenever the system load changed. Some nights, when my house heater kicks on and the ductwork clicks as it expands, my chest tightens before my mind catches up. Because for 1 second I think I'm back in that core counting the hours until boots hit the outer hatch. And the question I still can't put down is whether that place was actually processing people at all, or only simulating them so perfectly that the difference stops matching once you're locked in a mountain listening. Were those voices copies? Residual patterns? Or were the people who worked there, Rafe included, still in some reduced form inside that facility, aware enough to leave a code scratched under a console and warn the next man in line? I tell myself it doesn't matter now because I got out. That's what sensible people would say. But sometimes I wake just before dawn and hear the house settle. One pop in the walls, one small metallic click from the vent above the hall, and I remember the line that came first, before I understood anything else. You were never supposed to be in this shift. That means there was another shift, another person, another biological component scheduled to sit where I sat if snow or timing or chance had moved one thing by a few hours. I don't think about death much these days. I think about replacement. I think about systems that keep running by folding one life over another until the machine can't tell the difference. And every winter, when the air turns dry enough for the furnace to carry voices through the ducts, I stand in the hallway and listen for my name, because once, just once, right before the fan motor cut off, something in the vent used my own voice and asked if I'm still on this shift.